Hi, my name is Pastor Dwayne. I work for Miami Youth for Christ. I was a youth pastor and then a church planner for over 20 years in the city of Chicago. But I grew up in Hialeah, and it's my pleasure to be here serving young people in Miami. Now, in all my years of leadership, I've had a major issue. One of my top challenges is I like to do things alone. I like to work. Sometimes it's hard for me to delegate. But there's one area so important that you cannot fail to delegate. In fact, you could be bottlenecking your whole student ministry and literally having one of the most ancient problems is the bottleneck problem of leadership. Now, this is some good Publix old-fashioned lemonade. But there may be a gallon of lemonade, but only so much could come out at a time because the neck of this jug is smaller than the rest of the container. And sometimes that's what happens in leadership. We become a bottleneck. And no matter what your ministry is, this is some apple cider, whether it's youth ministry, whether it's small group, whatever your ministry is, you don't want to bottleneck your ministry. You don't want to constrain things and hold things back. And there's one area in youth ministry that I have seen more often than not where we bottleneck it. But let's go to a person in the Bible who had this same problem of bottlenecking his leadership. 3,500 years ago, about 3,500 years ago, there was a man named Moses. And Moses delivered the people out of Egypt. He faced Pharaoh. He was a great leader. I mean, even though he felt like he wasn't a great speaker and he was insecure, God used him mightily. I mean, he was a prayer warrior. They crossed the Red Sea. When they faced the Amalekites, he raised his hands. There's victory in the valley. God used Moses amazingly. But sometimes being a man of God could lead to this bottleneck problem. In Exodus 18, the scene is this. Moses had sent his wife Zipporah and his two sons, Gershom and Eleazar, to be with their grandpa, Jethro. You know, I can imagine in the conversation, it doesn't go into detail, but that's like Moses is probably talking to Zipporah and say, hey, babe, there's like 1 million people here. There's like thousands of problems. They're grumbling and complaining all the time. And I need to work overtime for a little bit. You know, Papa Jethro, he's getting a little bit up there in age. Maybe you want to spend a little bit of time with him. You know, we're going to be heading to the promised land and this may be your last chance to spend some time with them. And for the boys to see the grandpa, why don't you go hang out in Midian for a little while? And so Zipporah goes, shares with Jethro all that God has done. Jethro hears about how amazing the God of Israel is. And they spend some time together. And eventually Jethro's like, hey, it's time for you to go back, be with your own home and your own family. And so they travel back, and Jethro, you know, I could just imagine, you know, doesn't say the details, but I was like, they're loading up the camels. They got the luggage all tied up. They got a group of people traveling together, maybe some of the servants, workers, all working together, and they're traveling. The boys are there and they're traveling. Jethro sends word ahead, say, hey, go let Moses know we're on our way. Moses hears on the way. He prepares some space, gets dinner ready, gets everything ready to receive. And then sure enough, when Jethro gets there, it says that Moses greets him with a holy kiss and, you know, bows in humility before this great leader, Jethro, a great priest, spiritual leader. And, you know, they share the reports. They get together. They're hanging out. And Moses is telling them about the plagues, telling them about the Red Sea, telling them about the power of God in prayer, sharing all these reports. And Jethro wants to celebrate. He's like, man, now I know for sure the God of Israel is greater than any of these gods around these other nations that they worship, these little g gods, that the God of your God is for real. And so Jethro says, hey, we need to have a burnt offering. They get some animals. They sacrifice them to the Lord. Moses gets all the elders of Israel together, and they get together and they're having a meal. It says they eat a meal in the presence of the Lord. I mean, it's a great day. It's a family reunion. Worship is involved. The presence of God is there. And then in Exodus 18, verse 13, it says, the next day. The next day. How many know the next day comes and you got to go back to work? Next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people and they stood around him from morning till evening. The next day Moses goes, and all the people come back to him with all their problems. They're standing around from morning till evening, from sunrise to sunset. People with their problems, all standing around. It says when his father-in-law, when Jethro sees this and sees what Moses is doing for all the people, he says, "What is this you're doing for all the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered and said, "Because the people come to me to see God's will. Whenever there is a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Listen to how Jethro answers this. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." He's like, "Listen to me now. Let me give you some advice. May God be with you. You must be God's representative to the people." And then he says, hey, you need to teach them God's decrees. And then he says this in verse 21, "Select capable men of all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they could decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain. And all these people will go home satisfied." It says Moses listened to his father-in-law, did everything that he asked him to do, got everything rearranged, organized, and appointed people over thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, capable men who fear God, honest. He shared the load of caring for all the people and the problems. Student ministry director. Maybe you have delegated the tech team. Maybe you have had somebody help you with the games. Maybe you have gotten a weekly youth program in order and you thought, maybe I need small groups, and so we'll break up into small groups. Maybe some of you don't do small groups at youth group, but you could delegate a lot of things, but this is so important. You cannot handle the shepherding responsibilities all alone. You need a team of shepherds. We need volunteers to provide food and maybe to serve snacks. But if your volunteers just make it to serving snacks and you do all the shepherding, you're going to wear yourself out and wear your people out. You see, the secret of small groups isn't to be a sermon rehash. The secret of small groups, as some ministries say, isn't to close the back door of the church. Small groups could very well be the front door. And it isn't just about church growth and keeping people at your church. Small groups isn't just to provide fellowship and a Bible lesson. Small groups is all about shepherding and discipleship. It can include evangelism. I've seen many young people come to Christ even at a small group. But let me tell you this, with the problems teenagers are facing today, you need help. Maybe some of your shepherds handle the smaller issues and the medium issues, and then the bigger issues come to you, or maybe some of those big issues you need to take to the lead pastor of your congregation. But if you're doing all the shepherding alone, probably chances are the youth don't even call you with their problems. Because youth, they want to know somebody has time to listen, somebody that has time to care, somebody that knows them by name, somebody that's talked about small talk with them. And small groups do that. Small groups, and if they're well-trained small group leaders, they could even help youth grow. They could be small groups with intentional leaders, actually make disciples. But often we're so focused on an event, we don't invest in our small group leaders. We don't help them see themselves as shepherds. We don't empower them and say, hey, how about you meet and deal with this situation? I think you can handle this one. I'll take the harder case. Don't bottleneck the shepherding of your student ministry. The most important thing a student director could do is to build a team of leaders, and not just volunteers. We need servant leaders, but they also need to feel some of the load of shepherding. And small groups help with that. So I want to encourage you. If you're a youth group of only 12, you need at least a girl and a guy leader, and you could break up into 2 small groups of 6 boys and 6 girls. If you're a small group of 12, if you added 2 more leaders and you have 4 leaders, maybe you start out with 3 or 4 in a small group, but you would have your capacity to maybe be 24, and you could multiply middle school and high school. And if you are a medium-sized or big-sized small group, are you putting value by the time you invest in training, caring, shepherding your small group leaders? The shepherds need a shepherd. And you can't shepherd all the youth. If you have 50, 75, 100 youth, you need people over 10. You need maybe 2, because some people are going to have work overtime, have seasons, and not show up. And maybe you have 2 leaders over 10, 1-to-5 ratio, but they need to feel ownership. They need to feel responsibility of shepherding whatever age group or whatever grade and gender that's under their care, and not just saying, hey, here's a list. I preached, and that's very important because I put all this time in this sermon, and here's 4 questions, and make sure you go over it and rehash the sermon. No, small group time is a time where you invest, listen, ask questions, make sure they get concepts, find out where they spiritually. Do they need to get saved? Do they need to, if your church, whatever your theology, but do they need to get baptized or go to confirmation? What is their next step? Do they need to serve? Are you walking them through discipleship and helping them? Do they read their Bible? How can you help them? And are you looking at where each person in your small group is and being intentional? That, when you empower people to shepherd, to make disciples, the capacity of your youth group will explode, and there will be a movement of growing disciples who love Jesus and are inviting their friends. We want to prepare the nets. I'm praying for the day where youth all across South Florida hear the gospel multiple times before they graduate high school. And as we get to the point where every young person in South Florida is hearing the gospel, many are going to come to Christ because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. The harvest is going to come. And so we need to get the nets ready so that the fish don't fall through broken nets. We need to get small group leaders and shepherds and systems of mentoring and discipleship ready for a coming harvest of youth in South Florida. God bless you, and break the bottleneck in your leadership, delegate the shepherding, equip the shepherds, and get your youth ministry ready to grow and make disciples like never before.